The maid's toddler kept following the billionaire. The reason will break your heart. Alexander Harrington had everything money could buy. A penthouse overlooking Central Park, a collection of vintage cars, and a business empire that spanned 3 continents. At 33, he was Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. Recently engaged to Isabella Fontaine, a stunning socialite whose beauty was matched only by her ambition. Yet despite all his wealth, Alexander felt hollow inside, going through the motions of a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt empty within. His mornings followed a rigid routine. Wake at 5:30, work out in his private gym, shower, and head to the kitchen for his protein shake before his driver took him to Harrington Enterprises. It was during these morning rituals that he first noticed the child. Little Lily Ramirez, barely 2 years old, had started appearing in the hallway outside his bedroom. Her mother, Maria, was the live-in housekeeper Alexander's assistant had hired 3 months ago. Maria was quiet, hard-working, and kept mostly to herself, staying in the small staff quarters with her daughter. Alexander had barely exchanged more than polite nods with her, and he'd only seen Lily in passing. But lately, Lily had developed a peculiar habit. Every morning, without fail, she would toddle down the hallway and simply stand outside his door. Not crying, not making demands, just standing there with her worn, stuffed rabbit clutched in her small arms, her dark eyes watching him with an intensity that unnerved him. "Lily, sweetheart, come back here," Maria would whisper urgently, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she hurried to collect her daughter. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harrington. She keeps getting away from me." Alexander would nod curtly and continue on his way, but he couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes following him. There was something in the child's gaze, a longing, a searching quality that made his chest tighten in ways he didn't understand. Isabella noticed it, too, during one of her morning visits. "God, that child is always lurking around," she said, her perfectly manicured hand waving dismissively. "It's unsettling. You need to tell that maid to keep her daughter in their quarters. This is a home, not a daycare. She's just a baby, Isabella," Alexander found himself saying, surprising himself with the defense. "A baby who doesn't belong in the main part of the house." Isabella snapped back. "Really, Alexander, you're too soft sometimes. That's why people take advantage of you." But Alexander wasn't soft. Everyone who knew him would say the opposite. He was known as a ruthless businessman, someone who made hard decisions without sentiment. Yet something about Lily's silent vigil bothered him in ways he couldn't articulate. The following morning, Lily was there again. This time, when Maria came to retrieve her, Alexander stopped them. "It's fine," he said, his voice gentler than he intended. "She's not bothering me." Maria looked shocked, her eyes wide with gratitude and confusion. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I don't know why she does this. I try to keep her occupied, but she's drawn to you." After they left, Alexander stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the spot where Lily had been standing. There was something hauntingly familiar about the desperate hope in that little girl's eyes. Something that stirred memories he'd spent years trying to bury. As the days passed, Lily's morning visits became a strange constant in Alexander's life. She never approached him, never reached out or made a sound. She just stood there watching, waiting for something Alexander couldn't give her. He started leaving earlier, trying to avoid the encounter. But even when he didn't see her, he felt her presence. Like a ghost in his home. One morning, he came out of his room to find Lily had fallen asleep in the hallway, curled up against the wall with her rabbit. His heart clenched at the sight of her there, so small and vulnerable. Before he could stop himself, he knelt down beside her, noticing the worn state of her clothes, the way her rabbit had been mended multiple times with mismatched thread. "Lily," he said softly, and her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Alexander saw something in her face that made his breath catch. Recognition, as if she saw something in him that no one else could see. Then Maria appeared, panic-ridden across her face. "Mr. Harrington, I am so sorry. Does she do this often? Fall asleep in hallways?" Alexander asked, standing up. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "She's been having trouble sleeping ever since her father." She stopped, pressing her lips together as if she'd said too much. Alexander wanted to ask more, but the walls he'd built around himself held firm. Instead, he simply nodded and walked away. Lily's dark eyes burned into his memory. Something was happening, something he didn't understand, but he could feel the cracks beginning to form in the carefully constructed armor around his heart. Alexander couldn't concentrate during his morning meeting. His vice president was presenting quarterly projections, but all Alexander could see was Lily's face, the way she looked at him like he held all the answers to questions she couldn't yet ask. He found himself making excuses to work from home more often, telling himself it was about efficiency, when really he was trying to understand this strange pull the child had on him. That evening, Isabella arrived for dinner in a fury. "I don't understand why you insist on keeping that maid," she said, dropping her Hermes bag on the counter with more force than necessary. "She's incompetent, letting her child run wild through your home. It's unprofessional." "Maria is an excellent housekeeper," Alexander replied, his jaw tightening. "And Lily is just a toddler. A toddler who needs to learn boundaries." Isabella shot back. "When we're married, I won't have children disrupting our home. We've discussed this. We're not having kids. Your focus needs to be on the business, on building our legacy." Alexander looked at his fiancée, really looked at her, and felt a wave of something close to sadness. When had their relationship become so cold, so transactional? He proposed because it made sense. Isabella came from the right family, understood his world, and wanted the same things he thought he wanted. But lately, her presence felt suffocating rather than comfortable. After Isabella left, Alexander found himself walking through his penthouse, ending up outside the staff quarters. He could hear Maria singing softly in Spanish, a lullaby that tugged at something deep in his memory. Through the slightly open door, he could see her rocking Lily, the child finally settling down to sleep. The next morning, Lily wasn't in the hallway. Alexander told himself he was relieved, but instead he felt a strange sense of disappointment. He was halfway through his breakfast when he heard it, a small sound from the living room. Walking in, he found Lily sitting on the floor, carefully arranging a set of blocks she must have found somewhere in the house. She looked up at him, and instead of running away or calling for her mother, she held up a blue block, offering it to him with a tentative smile. Alexander froze. He should walk away, maintain the boundaries that Isabella had talked about. But instead he found himself sitting down on the floor beside her, taking the block from her small hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. Lily's smile widened, and she began babbling in that incomprehensible way toddlers do, handing him block after block. Alexander found himself building a tower with her, something he hadn't done since he was a child himself. The simple act released something in him, a pressure he didn't know he'd been carrying. "Mr. Harrington." Maria's voice was panicked as she rushed into the room. "Lily, no, we talked about this. It's okay," Alexander said, holding up a hand. "She's fine. We're just building." Maria stood there, uncertainty written across her face. She was young, Alexander realized. Not much younger than him, but life had left its marks on her. There were shadows under her eyes, worry lines that shouldn't be there on someone her age. "Please sit," Alexander found himself saying, gesturing to the couch. "If you have time, I'd like to understand why Lily does this. Why she follows me." Maria hesitated, then slowly sat down, perched on the edge of the couch like she might need to flee at any moment. "I've tried to stop her, Mr. Harrington. I know it's inappropriate." "That's not what I'm asking," Alexander interrupted gently. "I'm asking why. Children don't usually act this way without a reason." Tears filled Maria's eyes and she looked down at her hands twisted in her lap. "Lily's father. He died 6 months ago. Leukemia. He was only 31. Alexander felt his chest constrict. "I'm sorry. Carlos was a good man, a wonderful father. He and Lily, they were so close. Every morning, she would wait outside our bedroom door for him to wake up, just like she does with you now. He would scoop her up and they would have breakfast together, just the two of them. It was their special time." Understanding began to dawn on Alexander, painful and sharp. "She's looking for him." Maria nodded, wiping at her tears. "I've tried to explain that Poppy is gone, but she's so young. She doesn't understand death. And you, Mr. Harrington, you're tall like Carlos was. You have dark hair like him. Your morning routine, the time you leave your room, it's almost exactly when Carlos used to wake up. To her, I think some part of her sees what she's lost." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Lily wasn't following him because of him at all. He was simply filling the space her father had left behind. He was a ghost made flesh, a cruel reminder of what she'd lost. "I'll find other employment," Maria said quickly. "I should have told you sooner. This situation isn't fair to you." "No," Alexander said, surprising himself. "Don't go." Maria looked up, confusion in her eyes. Alexander couldn't explain the feeling coursing through him. The way Lily's loss had cracked something open inside him. He looked down at the little girl who had abandoned the blocks and was now dozing against his leg, her rabbit clutched tight. She felt so small, so fragile, so utterly trusting in a way that terrified him. "My father died when I was 7. Alexander heard himself saying, words he'd never spoken aloud to anyone. "Heart attack. One day he was there and the next he wasn't. I used to wait for him too by the door. I thought if I waited long enough, he'd come back." Maria's expression softened with understanding and shared grief. "I'm not good with children," Alexander continued. "I don't know what Lily needs, but I understand what it feels like to lose a parent, to have that hole in your life that never quite fills in." In that moment, something shifted. Lily stirred against his leg, making a small sound of contentment, and Alexander felt the walls around his heart, walls he built brick by brick after his father's death begin to crumble. He didn't know what this meant or where it would lead, but he couldn't turn away now. Not from Lily's need, and not from the reflection of his own childhood pain he saw in her dark eyes. The change didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Alexander found himself adjusting his morning routine, leaving his bedroom door open so he could hear Lily's small footsteps in the hallway. Instead of rushing past her, he began to stop to acknowledge her presence with a nod or a quiet good morning. Lily, for her part, seemed content with these small acknowledgments. She no longer looked quite so lost, quite so desperate. Her morning vigils became less about searching and more about connection, a ritual that gave structure to both their days. Isabella noticed immediately. "You're encouraging that child," she said one morning, her voice sharp with disapproval. "I saw you talking to her yesterday, Alexander. This has to stop. You're giving her mother ideas above her station." "Ideas about what?" Alexander asked, feeling his temper rise. "That I'm a human being capable of basic kindness." "Don't be naive," Isabella snapped. "These people see a wealthy unmarried man, well almost unmarried, being nice to a child, and they start thinking about opportunities. Next thing you know, the mother will be trying to trap you into something." "Maria isn't like that," Alexander found himself defending, though he barely knew the woman. "They're all like that," Isabella said dismissively. "Trust me, I've seen it 100 times. The help always wants more than their paycheck." Alexander looked at his fiancée and felt a deep sense of disappointment. When had she become so callous, so cruel, or had she always been this way, and he had simply chosen not to see it? That evening, he found Maria in the kitchen preparing dinner. Lily was in a playpen nearby, quietly playing with her rabbit. When the little girl saw Alexander, her face lit up with a smile that made his chest ache. "Mr. Harrington, dinner will be ready in 30 minutes, Maria said, not meeting his eyes. She'd been more reserved lately, probably sensing Isabella's hostility. "Maria, can we talk?" Alexander asked. She looked up, worry immediately clouding her features. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. I'd like to know more about Lily, about what she likes, what makes her happy." Maria's expression shifted from worry to confusion to cautious hope. "Why?" Alexander wasn't sure how to answer. He'd spent the last 3 weeks thinking about his own father. Memories he'd locked away for decades surfacing with painful clarity. His father had been his hero, kind, patient, always making time for Alexander despite his demanding career. After his death, Alexander's mother had retreated into her own grief, leaving him to navigate his loss alone. He'd learned to be self-sufficient, to not need anyone, to build walls so high that pain couldn't reach him. But Lily had somehow scaled those walls with nothing but her presence and her need. "Because I'd like to do better," Alexander finally said. "I'd like to be someone she doesn't have to stand in hallways waiting for." Tears filled Maria's eyes. "Mr. Harrington, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Alexander interrupted gently. "But I want to if that's okay with you." Over the next few weeks, Alexander's life transformed in ways he never expected. He started coming home earlier from the office, telling himself it was to avoid rush hour traffic, but really it was to see Lily before her bedtime. Maria, hesitant at first, began to relax around him, sharing stories about Lily's milestones, her favorite foods, the songs that made her laugh. Alexander learned that Lily loved books, especially ones with animals. He found himself stopping at bookstores, buying children's books for the first time in his life. The first time he read to her, Lily crawled into his lap with such trust that Alexander felt his throat close with emotion. Her small weight against his chest. The way she pointed at the pictures and babbled her commentary filled something in him he hadn't known was empty. Isabella's visits became increasingly tense. She would find Alexander on the floor with Lily, surrounded by toys or books, and her disapproval would hang in the air like smoke. "This is getting ridiculous," she said one evening. "You're acting like a babysitter, not a CEO. What will people think?" "I don't care what people think," Alexander replied and realized it was true. "Well, I care," Isabella shot back. "I care that my fiancé is spending more time with the help's child than with me. I care that you're making us look foolish." "Making us look foolish," Alexander repeated, anger rising in his chest. "A child lost her father, Isabella. She's grieving, and if I can help ease that pain, even a little bit, I will." "You can't save everyone, Alexander," Isabella said coldly. "And you can't replace her father. You're being selfish, giving her hope for something you can't sustain. What happens when you get bored of playing daddy? What happens when we get married and this stops? You're setting that child up for another abandonment." Her words hit their mark, and Alexander felt doubt creep in. Was Isabella right? Was he being selfish, inserting himself into Lily's life without thinking about the long-term consequences? That night, he couldn't sleep. He found himself walking through his penthouse, ending up in the living room where Lily had first offered him that blue block. The tower they'd built together was still there, carefully preserved on a shelf by Maria. Looking at it, Alexander realized something profound. He wasn't trying to replace Lily's father. He was trying to be someone who showed up, who stayed, who didn't leave a child alone with their grief the way he'd been left alone. The next morning, Lily was waiting in the hallway as usual. But instead of just acknowledging her and moving on, Alexander knelt down to her level. "Good morning, Lily," he said softly. She smiled at him, and then for the first time, she reached out and took his hand. It was such a small gesture, her tiny fingers wrapped around his much larger ones, but it felt monumental. Alexander felt tears prick his eyes as he gently squeezed her hand back. "Poppy," Lily whispered, and Alexander's heart broke and healed all at once. Maria appeared, apology already forming on her lips, but Alexander shook his head. "It's okay," he said. "I know I'm not her father, but maybe I can be someone who cares about her, someone who stays." Maria's tears spilled over. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us." But Alexander thought he did because Lily wasn't the only one who'd been lost, waiting in hallways for something that would never come back. Alexander had been lost, too, just in a different way. And somehow this little girl with her worn rabbit and her patient vigils had found him, had reminded him that he was capable of love, of connection, of being more than just the cold, calculating businessman everyone expected him to be. As Lily tugged him toward the kitchen, babbling about breakfast, Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in 26 years. Hope. Not the hope that comes from business deals or financial success, but the simple, profound hope that comes from human connection, from showing up for someone who needs you, from letting yourself need someone in return, 3 months into this new normal, Alexander's world was irrevocably changed. His morning routine now included reading time with Lily, breakfast together where she would smear oatmeal on her face and make him laugh with her antics, and goodbye hugs that left his suits wrinkled and his heart full. His colleagues had noticed a change. He smiled more, was more patient in meetings, and had even started a company initiative to provide better support for employees with young children. But with every step forward in his relationship with Lily and Maria, his engagement to Isabella deteriorated. The final straw came on a Saturday morning when she arrived unannounced to find Alexander teaching Lily how to finger paint in the kitchen. "This is absurd," Isabella shrieked, her designer heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. "Look at you covered in paint, acting like a child yourself. This isn't who you are, Alexander." Lily started to cry at the harsh tone, and Alexander immediately pulled her close, making soothing sounds. "It's okay, sweetheart, you're okay. Don't comfort her," Isabella snapped. "You're just reinforcing bad behavior. That child is manipulating you, and you're too blind to see it." Something in Alexander snapped. Standing up with Lily in his arms, he looked at Isabella and saw clearly for the first time. "She's 2 years old, Isabella. She's not manipulating anyone. She's a child who lost her father and found someone who makes her feel safe. And you know what? She makes me feel something, too. Something real. Something that matters more than business deals or social standing or any of the things you think are important." "I can't believe this," Isabella said, her voice shaking with rage. "You're choosing them over me. Over everything we've built together." "We haven't built anything together," Alexander replied quietly. "We've just been playing roles. The power couple. The perfect match. But I don't want to play anymore. I want something real." Isabella's face twisted with contempt. "You want to play house with the maid and her brat? Fine, but don't come crying to me when reality sets in, when you realize you've thrown away everything for a fantasy." She grabbed her bag and stormed out. And Alexander waited for the regret to come, the panic that he'd made a terrible mistake. But all he felt was relief in Lily's small arms around his neck and a certainty that he'd made the right choice. Maria emerged from the laundry room, her face pale. "Mr. Harrington, I heard. I'm so sorry. I never meant to cause problems between you and Miss Fontaine." "You didn't cause anything," Alexander assured her, setting Lily down. "Isabella and I were wrong for each other long before you came into my life. I just couldn't see it until Lily showed me what really matters." Over the next few weeks, Alexander and Maria settled into an easy partnership. She was no longer just his housekeeper. She was someone he talked to, laughed with, someone whose opinions he valued. He learned about her life in Mexico, how she'd met Carlos at university, how they dreamed of coming to America for a better life. She learned about his childhood, his loneliness after his father died, the way he'd filled the emptiness with work and ambition. Lily thrived with the attention. Her vocabulary exploded, and Alex, her version of Alexander, became one of her favorite words. She started running to him when he came home, trusting him to catch her. He taught her to dance, spinning her around the living room to old jazz records. He took her to the park, pushing her on swings, and catching her at the bottom of slides. He was there for her nightmares, her scraped knees, her triumphs over potty training. One evening, after putting Lily to bed together, a routine they'd fallen into naturally. Alexander and Maria sat in the living room with glasses of wine. It was the first time they'd truly relaxed together as equals rather than employer and employee. "Can I ask you something?" Maria said hesitantly. "Why are you doing all this?" Alexander thought carefully before answering. "When my father died, I learned to shut down my emotions. It was easier than feeling the pain. I built a life that looked successful from the outside, but inside I was numb. Then Lily started following me, looking at me with those eyes that saw through all my defenses. And I realized I didn't want to be numb anymore. I wanted to feel even if it hurt." "She sees her father in you," Maria said softly. "I worry about that sometimes. What happens when she's old enough to understand you're not him? Then I'll help her understand that having someone new in your life doesn't erase the people you've lost." Alexander replied, "My father will always be my father and no one could replace him. But I've learned I can honor his memory by being the kind of man he was. Someone who shows up, who loves without conditions, who makes time for what matters." Maria's eyes glistened with tears. "Carlos would have liked you," she whispered. "He would have been grateful that Lily found someone like you." Alexander reached out and took her hand, a gesture that felt natural and right. "I'm the one who should be grateful. Lily gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The ability to love, to connect, to be vulnerable. She saved me, Maria. You both did." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the lights of the city twinkle through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Alexander thought about the path that had led him here, the grief, the loneliness, the hollow success. And he thought about Lily, sleeping peacefully in her room with her mended rabbit, trusting that the adults in her life would keep her safe and loved. That night, Alexander made a decision. He called his attorney the next morning and had him draw up new papers, a trust fund for Lily's education and future life insurance policies, naming Maria as beneficiary, a formal employment contract that guaranteed her job security and benefits. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He added a codicil to his will, naming himself Lily's legal guardian in the event anything happened to Maria. When he presented the papers to Maria, she broke down sobbing. "I can't accept this," she said through her tears. "It's too much. It's not nearly enough," Alexander replied. "You and Lily are family now. Let me take care of you the way family should." "But we're not really family," Maria protested weakly. Alexander smiled. "Aren't we? Family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, about choosing each other every day. Lily chose me first, waiting in that hallway. Then I chose her back and now I'm choosing both of you." That evening, Lily toddled up to Alexander with a drawing she'd made. Stick figures that vaguely resembled three people holding hands. "Mama, Alex, Lily," she declared proudly. Alexander picked her up, hugging her tight, and over her head his eyes met Maria's. Something passed between them, an understanding that they'd become something more than employer and employee, more than acquaintances thrown together by circumstance. They'd become what Lily had drawn, a family, unconventional and unexpected, but real nonetheless. Spring came to New York City, bringing with it cherry blossoms and longer days. Alexander found himself taking more time off work, prioritizing mornings in the park with Lily, and afternoons helping Maria with household tasks just to spend time with her. Their conversations had grown deeper, more personal, touching on dreams and fears and the complicated nature of moving forward while honoring the past. Lily, now 2.5, had grown more verbal and affectionate. She called Alexander Alex with perfect confidence, and her bedtime routine was incomplete without him reading at least 3 books. But more than that, she'd started bringing Maria and Alexander together in small ways, insisting they both tuck her in, demanding they both attend her pretend tea parties, holding both their hands when they walked. She's matchmaking. Alexander's assistant, Sarah, observed one day when she stopped by with papers to sign. She'd watched Lily orchestrate a scenario where both Alexander and Maria had to sit together on the couch. "That little girl is smarter than most adults I know." Alexander laughed it off, but Sarah's words lingered because the truth was his feelings for Maria had shifted from respect and friendship into something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified him. She was brilliant and funny with a strength forged in grief and struggle. She saw him not as Alexander Harrington, billionaire CEO, but as Alexander, the man who made silly voices when reading children's books, and who burned toast more often than not. Maria felt it, too. He could see it in the way her eyes lingered on him, in her blush when their hands accidentally touched, in the way she laughed at his jokes. But they both held back, cautious of disrupting the delicate balance they'd created, neither wanting to risk what they'd built for Lily's sake. The turning point came on Lily's 3rd birthday. Alexander had planned an elaborate celebration, renting out a section of Central Park Zoo and inviting children from the local community center. As he watched Lily's face light up at the sight of penguins, Maria came to stand beside him. "Thank you for this," she said softly. "You've given her something I never could have on my own." "We're partners in this," Alexander replied. "Everything I do for Lily, I do for you, too." Maria turned to look at him and something in her expression made his heart race. "Alexander, I need to tell you something. I need you to know that what I feel for you, it's not about money or security or gratitude, even though I am grateful. It's I know," Alexander interrupted gently. "Because I feel it, too. I'm in love with you, Maria. I have been for months. I'm in love with your strength, your kindness, the way you've rebuilt your life for Lily. I'm in love with your laugh, your stubbornness, the way you sing in Spanish when you think no one's listening." Tears streamed down Maria's face. "I love you, too," she whispered. "But I'm scared. Carlos has only been gone 1.5 years. What kind of person falls in love so soon after losing their husband? What does that say about me?" Alexander took her hands in his. "It says you're human. It says you're brave enough to let yourself live and love again. Carlos would want that for you, wouldn't he?" "Yes," Maria admitted, sobbing. "He made me promise before he died. He said, 'Don't spend your life grieving me. Find someone who loves you and Lily the way you deserve. Be happy, amor,' but I didn't think I could. I didn't think I'd want it. And now I wake up every morning grateful that Lily followed you into our lives. Grateful that you saw past our situation to who we really are. Grateful that you've become the best part of every day." Alexander pulled her into his arms and for the first time they kissed. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, they found Lily watching them. Her face split in the biggest smile Alexander had ever seen. "Alex kiss Mama," she announced gleefully, clapping her hands. "Lily family." And just like that, the last walls came down. Alexander knelt down and opened his arms, and Lily ran into them. Maria joined them, and they stood there in the middle of the zoo, wrapped in each other, a family that grief and love had forged together. The next few months were a revelation. Alexander moved Maria and Lily into the master bedroom suite with him, converting the adjacent room into a princess paradise for Lily. He proposed to Maria on a quiet evening at home with Lily helping him present a ring. Not the flashy diamond Isabella would have demanded, but an emerald surrounded by smaller stones, each representing the three of them. "Are you sure?" Maria asked, even as happy tears fell. "Your world, Alexander, I'm not part of that world. I don't know how to be a billionaire's wife." "Then don't be a billionaire's wife," Alexander replied. "Be my wife. Be Lily's mother. Be yourself. That's all I need. All I've ever needed." They were married in a small ceremony 3 months later with Lily as the flower girl who mostly just threw all the petals at once and giggled hysterically. Alexander's mother attended, wiping away tears as she told Maria, "You've brought my son back to life. I'd given up hope that he'd ever let himself be happy." The business world was shocked by the whirlwind romance. The gossip columns full of speculation and some cruelty about the housekeeper who caught a billionaire. But Alexander didn't care. He issued one statement through his company's PR department and then ignored all media requests. What mattered was the life they were building together, the family they'd become. Lily adjusted beautifully to having Alexander as a permanent fixture. She started calling him Daddy Alex, which eventually became just Daddy. Maria worried sometimes that Lily was forgetting Carlos. But Alexander helped her create memory books, told Lily stories about her first father, and made sure that Carlos's presence remained honored in their home. "She's allowed to love us both," Alexander told Maria one night as they watched Lily sleep. "Love doesn't divide, it multiplies. She can carry Carlos in her heart while making room for me, just like you can." And it was true. Maria's love for Carlos hadn't diminished. It had simply transformed, becoming a treasured memory rather than an open wound. And her love for Alexander was different. Built on friendship and partnership and the day-to-day choice to build a life together. 6 months after their wedding, Maria told Alexander she was pregnant. His joy was immediate and overwhelming, but so was his concern. "Are you okay with this?" he asked. "I know we hadn't planned." "I'm more than okay," Maria assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "This baby is a gift, a symbol that life goes on, that happiness can follow sorrow. Lily's going to be a wonderful big sister." And she was. When baby Ethan Alexander Harrington entered the world 8 months later, Lily took her role seriously, constantly checking on him, bringing him toys, and insisting on helping with everything. Alexander marveled at the family they'd become. So different from what he'd imagined his life would be. So much richer and more meaningful than anything he'd built in his corporate empire. 5 years after Lily first stood in that hallway, Alexander stood in the same spot. But everything had changed. The penthouse had transformed from a cold showcase of wealth into a warm home filled with children's laughter, family photos, and the comfortable clutter of daily life. Lily was now 7, bright and curious with Maria's kindness and a confidence that came from being deeply loved. Ethan was 4, a bundle of energy who followed his big sister everywhere. Alexander had scaled back his role at Harrington Enterprises, bringing in a new CEO so he could focus on what really mattered, being present for his family. He still consulted and served on the board, but his identity was no longer tied to his net worth or his business achievements. He was daddy to Lily and Ethan, husband to Maria, and the version of himself he'd always been meant to be. One evening, Alexander found Lily sitting in the hallway outside what used to be his bedroom, now Ethan's room. She had a photo album in her lap, one of the memory books they'd made about Carlos. "Hey sweetheart," Alexander said, sitting down beside her. "What are you doing?" "Remembering my first daddy," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Is that okay?" Alexander's throat tightened with emotion. "Of course it's okay. It's more than okay." Lily looked at the photos, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "I don't remember his face anymore," she admitted quietly. "Not without pictures. Does that make me bad?" "Oh, Lily, no." Alexander pulled her close. "Memories fade, especially from when we're very young. But you carry your first daddy in other ways. In your kindness, in your love of music, in the way you take care of Ethan. Your mom tells me you're so much like him. Do you think he knows about you?" Lily asked. "Do you think he knows you take care of me and Mama now?" Alexander had to swallow hard before he could answer. "I think if there's any way for him to know, he does. And I think he's grateful that your mama found love again and that you have someone who loves you as much as he did." "I'm glad Mama found you," Lily said simply. "I'm glad I followed you that day. You know what, baby? So am I. Following me was the bravest thing you ever did." Lily snuggled closer. "Daddy Alex, can I tell you a secret? Always. I used to think if I waited long enough, my first daddy would come back. That's why I stood in the hallway. I thought maybe if I was patient, he'd open the door and everything would be okay again." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "I know, sweetheart, I know. But then you started opening the door," Lily continued. "And you were different from my memories, but you made me feel safe. And after a while, I wasn't waiting for him to come back anymore. I was waiting for you to come out because you were my person, too." Alexander couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the simple profundity of her words. This little girl, who had started as a grieving toddler waiting for a ghost, had taught him everything that mattered about love, about showing up, about letting yourself be vulnerable enough to need and be needed. Maria found them there a few minutes later. "There you both are," she said, smiling. "Ethan's asking for his bedtime story, and he insists you both have to do it." As they walked together to Ethan's room, Lily holding both their hands, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He thought about the man he'd been, successful but empty, engaged to someone who brought out his worst qualities, unable to connect meaningfully with anyone. And he thought about the miracle of Lily's persistent love, how she'd refused to give up on him even when he tried to ignore her. How her simple need had cracked open his heart. That night, after both children were asleep, Alexander and Maria sat together on their balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Do you ever regret it?" Maria asks awfully. "Giving up the life you had before us?" Alexander turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. "I didn't give up a life. I found one. Everything before you and Lily was just existing. This is living. Even though we came with complications, with grief and loss and a child who needed so much, especially because of that," Alexander replied, "Lily taught me that the best things in life come from choosing love, even when it's complicated, even when it hurts, even when it means breaking open your carefully protected heart. She taught me that showing up matters, that consistency matters, that being present for someone's pain and joy is what makes us human. Maria kissed him softly. You saved us, you know. We were drowning and you threw us a lifeline. No, M.I. Amor. Alexander corrected gently, using his imperfect Spanish. Lily saved me. She saw something in me I'd forgotten existed. The capacity to love unconditionally, to be needed, to be part of something bigger than myself. Every morning when she stood in that hallway, she was offering me a chance to choose differently, to be better. And eventually, I was brave enough to take it. They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of partnership and deep understanding. Inside, their children slept safely, surrounded by love. And Alexander knew that the board meetings, the business deals, the wealth, none of it compared to this moment, this life, this family that grief and love had woven together. Later, as he checked on the children one last time before bed, Alexander paused at Lily's door. She was sleeping peacefully, her worn rabbit, now carefully preserved and only brought out for special occasions, on the shelf beside her bed. Above it hung two photos, one of Carlos holding baby Lily, his face full of love and pride, and one of their family. All four of them laughing in Central Park. Thank you, Alexander whispered to Carlos's photo. Thank you for the daughter who taught me how to love. Thank you for trusting me with your family. I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of that trust. And as he walked back to his own bedroom to Maria waiting for him, Alexander thought about the hallway where it all began. That hallway had been a place of waiting, of grief, of desperate hope. Lily had stood there mourning what she'd lost, and Alexander had walked past her, locked in his own kind of grief, unable to see what he needed. But time and love had transformed that hallway, just as they'd transformed all of them. Now it was simply part of their home, a space where a little girl had once been brave enough to wait for love, and a broken man had finally been brave enough to stop and receive it. The reason Lily kept following the billionaire had broken his heart. But in breaking it open, she'd filled it with more love than he'd ever thought possible. And in the end that made all the difference. To extend this story further and reach an approximate 1-hour narration length, let's delve deeper into the characters' backstories, add more detailed scenes of daily life, explore internal monologues, and include additional subplots that enrich the emotional journey without altering the core narrative. Alexander's early days were marked by a childhood of privilege mixed with profound isolation. Born into old money, his father's sudden death not only left a void but also thrust him into the role of the family provider at a young age. His mother, overwhelmed by sorrow, immersed herself in social circles, leaving Alexander to learn the art of self-reliance through boarding schools and strict tutors. These experiences shaped him into the formidable CEO he became, but they also instilled a fear of vulnerability that kept him at arm's length from genuine relationships. When he first met Isabella at a gala, she seemed like the perfect match, ambitious, polished, and from a similar background. Their engagement was announced in all the major society pages, but Alexander often lay awake at night, wondering if this was all there was to life. Meanwhile, Maria's story was one of resilience born from hardship. Growing up in a small village in Mexico, she dreamed of becoming a teacher. At university, she met Carlos, a kind-hearted engineer with a laugh that could light up any room. They married young, full of plans for the future. Lily's birth brought immense joy, but Carlos's diagnosis shattered their world. The treatments drained their savings, forcing Maria to move to America after his death, seeking work to provide for Lily. The job at Alexander's penthouse was a lifeline, but the grief weighed heavily on her, making every day a battle to appear composed while her heart ached. In the weeks following Lily's initial appearances, Alexander began noticing small details about the mother-daughter duo. One evening, as he returned late from a board meeting, he overheard Maria telling Lily a bedtime story about her father, how Carlos would build sandcastles on imaginary beaches and promised to take her to the ocean one day. The tenderness in Maria's voice stirred something in Alexander, reminding him of his own father's stories of adventure. He lingered outside the door longer than he should have, a pang of envy mixing with sympathy. As Lily's morning rituals continued, Alexander experimented with small gestures. One day, he left a new stuffed animal, a soft bear, outside his door. When Lily found it, her eyes widened in delight, and she clutched it alongside her rabbit. Maria's thank you was hesitant, but genuine, sparking their first real conversation beyond pleasantries. She named it Bear Bear, Maria said with a shy smile. Alexander chuckled, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. Isabella's jealousy escalated gradually. During a weekend brunch, she confronted Alexander about the intrusion. "It's not just the child, it's the way you look at them, like they're your charity project." Alexander defended his actions, but internally, he questioned if Isabella's words held truth. Was he overstepping? That doubt led to a brief period where he tried to distance himself, instructing his assistant Sarah to handle more household matters. But Lily's absence in the hallway felt like a void, and he soon relented. The block building scene expanded into multiple play sessions. Alexander, initially awkward, learned Lily's favorite games. They built not just towers but entire cities, with Alexander narrating stories of brave explorers, echoing his father's tales. Maria watched from afar at first, then joined in, sharing laughs over Lily's imaginative additions. These moments fostered a bond, with Maria opening up about Carlos's love for architecture, explaining why Lily was so drawn to building. When Maria revealed Carlos's death, Alexander shared more about his own loss. "I remember the funeral," he said, voice low. "Everyone telling me to be strong, but I just wanted to cry." Maria nodded. "I tell Lily it's okay to miss him, but sometimes I hide my tears." Their shared vulnerability deepened their connection. Post-breakup with Isabella, Alexander threw himself into family life. He organized outings. A trip to the zoo where Lily fed giraffes, her giggles echoing, picnics in Central Park with homemade sandwiches Maria prepared. He attended Lily's first playgroup, feeling out of place among other parents but proud when she introduced him as "my Alex." As romance blossomed with Maria, subtle moments built tension. A shared glance during a movie night, hands brushing while cooking dinner. Lily, intuitive, would push them together. "Mama, sit next to Alex." Their confession at the birthday party was preceded by weeks of unspoken longing, with Alexander confiding in Sarah, "I've never felt this way, scared but alive." After marriage, family life included holidays. Their first Christmas with a tree Lily decorated, ornaments from Mexico honoring Carlos. Ethan's birth brought new joys and challenges. Sleepless nights where Alexander and Maria took turns rocking him, strengthening their partnership. Years later, as Lily reflected in the hallway, Alexander shared more stories of his father, helping her process her emotions. The family grew closer through everyday adventures, school plays, family vacations to the beach Carlos had promised, where they built real sandcastles. In quiet evenings, Alexander and Maria often reminisced. Lily's following changed everything, Alexander would say. Maria smiled. She knew what we needed before we did. Their life, woven from loss and love, became a testament to second chances, filled with laughter, support, and unbreakable bonds. The hallway, once a symbol of grief, now echoed with the footsteps of a happy family, proving that love finds a way to heal even the deepest wounds.